that trauma loop that you were just describing. It's creating a glitch. It's an error message. Post-traumatic stress, all those kinds of things are glitches and error messages.
There are ways for you to be free, whether your life is being impacted with anxiety or with some physical elements that are results of what has happened in your life negatively, like the trauma being kind of stored and coming out through autoimmune disease.
Your brain's just a giant computer. So you have recorded billions of bits of information throughout your lifetime. And that is recorded and stored in memory. Where the whole issue is coming in is from the explicit memory system that we have, that only humans have.
Don and I have gotten to know each other. We're both members of Genius Network, run by Joe Polish. And we've just really connected on this issue of helping people be free from the negative things that have happened in their lives, trauma, and just being able to free to thrive and live the life that they really desire and deserve. So looking forward to the conversation today, Don. Excited to have this and love to open up with some questions. But if you want to say something to start, that'd be great.
Well, same thing. I've been really excited to do this. I know we've been talking about trying to put this together for a little while, so I've been really looking forward. We have such great conversations. I think people are going to find this very interesting from the two perspectives, all the work that you've been doing and then the work that I've been doing. I think we're going to offer some pretty good insight. So,
and yes, for those who are tuning in, if you have been through anything negative in your life, I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be yes. You may immediately say, like, I've been through something traumatic, or maybe you haven't. Dr. Gabor Mate is also a friend of ours, is a specialist in addiction and trauma. And he says, we've all been through big T trauma or little t trauma. And so, big T trauma is the obvious thing society calls trauma. Grew up suffering from abuse, or parents with addiction or alcoholism, are awful things that could have happened to you in your young life or adult life. But all of us have been through what he calls little t trauma, where our needs have not been met, even with the best efforts of our parents, emotional needs, other needs, things that have scarred us that maybe we're not even aware of, that's been running in our subconscious, that is then impacting us emotionally, spiritually, physically. And Don runs the Inspired Performance Institute, but you have not always been a doctor. You have not always been in this work. You're previously an entrepreneur running a number of businesses. So I'd love to hear first, for those who are listening again, if you have any negative experiences in your life or any sort of big T or little t trauma, tune in, because there's going to be some great value here for you from Don as an expert. And I've got my own expertise in my path, but certainly not at the academic level and what you're doing to help people. So Don, can you just share a little bit about your path into this work of helping people in this way?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And, I know Gabor talks about, small T trauma. I called those emotional concussions. So I wrote my second book and I called them emotional concussions because they may not be what people will call a trauma. Because I have a lot of people come in and say, well, I haven't had anything like, the Boston Marathon bombing. And when they see that kind of stuff on our site, and I say, yeah, you may have had some emotional concussions. That's the neglect or the abandonment that may not even be intentional. So those can show up, with the best of intentions, great parents, but they're suffering with that. And that was really what happened with us. And that's how I got into this. I've always been an entrepreneur. I was in the financial services business, real estate, mortgages, insurance for a number of years. And that was up in Canada. Then when I moved to the United States, I got involved in a number of different businesses here as well. But it wasn't until my daughter showed up with Crohn's that I started to recognize some of the issues that she was dealing with, and there were no answers. And at that time, we really still didn't know a lot about it, because they told us there's no cure for Crohn's, and we don't even know what causes Crohn's. She's just going to have to manage this for the rest of her life. And she really suffered. She had 4 different operations. They cut out about 24 inches of her intestines over those operations. And she'd go down to 95 pounds and just really struggle. And so it's an autoimmune disorder. And a lot of people, if you have autoimmune, probably going to be linked back to your trauma. I'm going to explain a lot about that when we're talking here today. And then
Great.
it wasn't until she got her second autoimmune disorder called idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, which
Oh,
is,
that's a mouthful.
I know, which is basically where the lungs start to release the iron in the blood. It's an overload issue.
Okay.
And so she started coughing up blood. They put her in ICU for 3.5 weeks and they did all these tests and came back with that diagnosis. Now, that was a potential death sentence because a lot of people could die within 5 years. And again, they came back with no cure. We don't even know what causes it. She should live close to a hospital because her
Oh
lungs
my
could fill
gosh.
up in 15 minutes. And that's when my wife said to me, she goes, because I was adopted, right? So Martha, she goes, this must be your fault. This must be a genetic thing. You need to figure this out or
Oh
we're
my
going to lose our
gosh.
daughter.
Oh my gosh.
So I went back and got my PhD and started doing the research to try to figure it out.
Wow. That's extraordinary. And we're going to hear your daughter is thriving now, which is amazing. We want to hear. So, people, if you listen to that story, you know this is interesting work. And there are ways for you to be free, whether your life is being impacted with anxiety or with some physical elements that are results of what has happened in your life negatively, like the trauma being kind of stored and coming out through autoimmune disease. I would love, Don, for you to share kind of in layman's terms, what happens in the brain, like, neurology 101, when we get ourselves into a traumatic situation. I mean, everybody generally knows we get into fight or flight and, the adrenaline gets released. And this is all in order to help us to be able to, survive and fight and flee and do what we need to do in order to, get away and get to safety. It's all about protection of us. And everyone has examples where they know this in their life. I most recently did when I was recently attacked while I was out running in the Iowa area there for a speaking engagement. I personally felt that fight or flight, and I decided to fight the attacker off and chase him down. And he's now in jail. So, but, being a combat pilot as well, very aware of kind of what happens when we get into those moments of adrenaline and kind of hyper focus, and then what happens in the body. That's in the moment of the trauma. But when the trauma gets stuck, people are basically sensing that they're not safe when they actually are. So there's other, this is my layman's way I describe it in my coaching and in my speeches. Your body's kind of looking around, your brain's looking around, your eyes are looking around to see if there's any threats to keep you safe, right? And then when it senses something that maybe, going back to the library of experiences, is maybe attached to something you've been through in the past or something you saw or something maybe that's generational, it senses like there's a threat. And that same thing is happening when you're actually safe. People may have heard it's called like an amygdala hijack and the HPA axis. I don't want to get too much into the neurobiology, but so what is happening when people are actually safe? And it's often called a kind of a post-traumatic stress loop, right? And they're stuck in that PTS loop. What's happening in their mind and their body, and why is that happening? Can you kind of share that in layman's terms?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And
How did I do? Was
amazing.
that
You did.
okay?
That was actually very good. Yeah. And your story of what just recently happened to you is amazing, like what you were able to do. So again, I know we've talked about it, but if anybody hasn't heard what you went through, you really need to look that up and how resilient and resourceful you were in that kind of a situation.
Well, and let me say, for those who are tuning in just for that, I've been through trauma in the past, which we'll get into, and I did not respond that way. It's been the growth and the work and the integration that I've done over time that brought me to the place where I was able to, in that moment, respond that way instead of contracting and being stuck in the fear.
Yeah, because I mean, everybody knows about fight or flight, but there's also freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another actually very
More common.
resourceful kind of thing to do. And freeze makes sense because if you had experienced childhood trauma,
Yeah.
you couldn't fight back and you couldn't
Mm-hmm.
run.
Right.
So freeze was a very good
Yep.
response in that kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of things that happen. But let me share with you what I understood about why, and this is what I was trying to figure out for my daughter.
Yeah.
So why was she constantly in this state? And what I found is that unresolved trauma, that trauma loop that you were just describing, it's creating a glitch. It's an error message.
Okay.
Post-traumatic stress, all those kinds of things are glitches and error messages. Your brain's just a giant computer.
Mhm.
So you have recorded billions of bits of information throughout your lifetime,
Mhm.
and that is recorded and stored in memory. Where the whole issue is coming in is from the explicit memory system that we have that only humans have. Animals don't store explicit memory,
Mhm.
humans do. So we store a tremendous amount of detail about events and experiences. So I usually the way I ask it is, and you can answer this for the people now. Do you remember what you ate for dinner last night?
Yes.
So what did you have?
Because we're doing a healthy life challenge. I had tilapia and I had avocado and Brussels sprouts.
Very good. So when I asked you that, anybody watching this will notice that Martha looked up, right? And you saw pictures, right, of what you ate. You probably
Yeah.
saw the tilapia, what you cooked, the Brussels sprouts, all of that. That's how you stored the images of what you ate last night. Now,
Mm.
last night wasn't threatening or disturbing, so it's stored as a fairly low resolution file. Had that been a threatening event and all your senses are heightened, you're in a hypervigilant state, fight or flight. Your senses, your sight, smell, hearing are
Mhm.
all intensified.
Yep.
So how's it going to record that? High def, tremendous
Mhm.
amounts of detail. So here's where the issue is coming in. Your subconscious mind is survival, the survival part of your
Yes.
brain. It
Yes.
operates in the present. It only understands now, the same way animals are fully present in the moment. So Boomer's always present, right? So
Yep.
he's in the moment. If a threat shows up, Boomer will respond to the threat. But if there's no
Boomer is
threat,
my rescue golden retriever, everyone. He's over
beautiful.
chewing on a peanut butter Kong right now.
So animals don't respond to imagined threats because they can't imagine and they don't store the details about those kinds of threats.
Right.
But we do. So if your survival brain, your subconscious, operates 95% of everything that's going on for you, and it recalls an event from 10 years ago because something that was in the present looked like, sounded like, smelled like it, even if you weren't consciously aware of it.
Right. Yes.
And all of a sudden, you don't know why your heart's pounding in your chest. It's because your mind is looking at old information
Yep.
in real time. And
Yep.
where I really learned a lot about this was a study. I don't know if you ever heard of him, Henry Molaison. He's the most studied brain in history.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is where I really made the connection between memory, is because that's what the path I was going down, saying memory's creating this glitch. Well, Henry Molaison, when he was a young boy, fractured his skull in an
Oh, yeah,
accident.
yeah, yeah. I've heard of this.
Yeah. And he started having seizures and blackouts. And so he struggled with that all the way up into his 20s until he found a renowned neurosurgeon called Dr. William Schofield, who said, oh, we can fix this by drilling two holes into your head, and we're going to remove your hippocampus and part of your amygdala. Now, at the time, this is in the 50s. This is when they're doing lobotomies on people.
Oh my gosh.
And so what he said is, we're going to drill those two holes. We'll remove the hippocampus, part of your amygdala. They did. Henry agreed because he was desperate. And so he went through the operation and it looked like a success because his seizure stopped. Now, Martha, I saw something very different when I did this research because I was so focused on the
Yeah.
memory. So Henry could never, for the rest of his life, store memory because without the hippocampus,
Yeah. The HPA axis, right? That's where it begins. We were talking
yep.
about. Yeah.
And so you need the hippocampus to process memory. So everything that you're listening to here right now is going through the hippocampus
Mhm.
from short term and being processed into long term memory. So without the hippocampus, he can't process it. It will go from short term memory and evaporate, and it's just gone. So he
Like
could watch
51st dates.
51st dates exactly. So Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah.
So he could watch the same TV show 15 minutes later as if he was watching it for the first time.
It's a beautiful way to live, but your family and friends would get very frustrated with you, right?
Exactly. But
Yeah.
that's how the animals live,
Yeah.
right? They
Right.
don't store it. So if they get an attack, what happens? What do you see? That's where that term came, shake it
They
off.
literally shake it off. I watched this with like Boomer. Actually, I watched this with a dog that we just rescued after being out for 22 days. As soon as he saw his family, he just shook his whole body and shook it off.
He reset his nervous system. That's
Yes.
what they do. And then they go back into the moment and they're
Yeah.
not remembering the attack. They
Yeah.
don't store information about it. Animals learn through association and repetition.
Yeah.
So when that dog that you rescued, right, saw his family, he just recognized them through an association that they're safe and they're going to love me and take care of me.
Yeah.
There's where, and when he reset, he's right back as if he had
Yeah.
never been gone.
Yeah.
So that's a great system. We don't have that
You don't
system.
have that, right? We can't just shake it off.
We can't shake it. And people will tell you, just let it go, just shake
Yeah.
it off.
Yeah.
But that's not how our brain works.
Mm.
So our brain is very different. We store all that detail. So for Henry, he went through the rest of his life, never been able to store memory. And so that's what they basically came about was they said, okay, what we learned from this study is that his hippocampus was responsible for memory, which was true. What I saw though is Henry's seizure stopped. And so what I said is, why would his seizure stop? What would the hippocampus have to do with his seizures? Nothing.
Yeah.
He never had an accident. His accident never happened, according to Henry's memory. So you can't have a
Right.
seizure if you
Right.
never had an accident.
Yeah.
And that's what I saw. So that really helped me have a better understanding of how memory is at the root of all of this issue. So
Okay.
great to know, but what are we going to do about it?
Okay. So I have a lot of questions. There's so many we could get into related to that. And I know it's going to help a lot of people. As I think about my own journey, which we've talked about and I've shared publicly, and the traumas I've experienced in my life, probably a lot of little T that still needs to be unpacked, but big T starting when I was 12 years old and my dad very suddenly passed away. I mean, there one day, gone the next. And then my mom went back to school and back to work. And just, the 2x4 I got hit with related to that, and just trudging through those adolescent and years in high school, looking for some additional parenting and a father figure, just, crying out for help as I was trying to work through my grief and my suffering in the tools that I had at the time, which were not a lot, but some of them were running. And I want to talk about that, being outside, running, other things that I didn't understand that were helping me neurologically, having a dog and that connection with the human animal bond. I then, looked up to this coach of mine who I previously had this coach who was this beautiful father figure and just had this wonderful influence on my life. And he moved on. And the next coach I transferred that trust to, and like happens to so many people, he violated that trust and abused that trust. A man in authority, over twice my age. And so many of the listeners can relate to this, or viewers, man or woman who, were hurt by somebody when they were young, and abused by somebody in authority, whether it was a family member or a neighbor, or trusted, teacher, coach, clergy, whatever that is. So many people have been through this. And so I had that experience and then went off to the Air Force Academy. So, I just knew there was something in me that was just like, this is not going to hold me down or hold me back. And I am not going to let him, continue to hurt me. Part of my decision to go so far away, literally geographically, was to physically get away from from him. And then, later experience similar dynamics, unfortunately, in sexual assault in the military. So I think about like the conscious loop you're talking about when you see something and it's a threat. This was more conscious to me when I would go back home for like Christmas vacation. I would see somebody like even from behind that had the same, dark hair, like looked like my abuser, my coach, going out of a restaurant. And for a second, I'd be like, that's him. And then, so my body would get into that fight or flight thinking that was him when it wasn't him, just because it registered that it looked like him, if that makes sense. But people can maybe relate to a smell or a song or like something that might be, again, that's more of a conscious remembrance, but oftentimes there's something subconsciously going on with that we're not even aware of. I feel like I never really suffered from being in that PTS loop myself, my challenge was I decided to disconnect and suppress and just keep charging on, determined that these things were not going to hold me down and hold me back. And I later had to reintegrate and heal and go on that journey. I mean, I'm still on it. I feel like I'm, a pretty long way along it, but I, don't remember being like stuck in a loop, but there's things that are happening obviously inside me and inside others who have been through this, whether you are in an open anxiety, like you're living life in anxiety related to something you've been through, or some other trauma. Can you just kind of walk through some of the dynamics that are happening with people who can relate to? Maybe they feel like, oh, I don't get into a PTS loop like that, but things are actually happening. It might be impacting your body, your choices, your relationships, withdrawing, contracting to stay safe. I don't know, any wisdom you have for someone who may say, that doesn't apply to me. I don't get into a PTS loop.
Yeah, it shows up somehow in some way. And here's what I learned.
Yeah.
Is that when we have this unresolved trauma that's running on this loop, you again may not be aware of it. There's some very
Yeah.
high functioning people like you, right, who are, you would never think there's anything going on. But what happens is unresolved trauma creates inflammation. That's
Yeah.
the response to trauma, whether it's
Yep.
physical trauma or emotional trauma. The inflammation then compromises the immune system and compromises your neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
So it's actually affecting the DNA, the way, and not the DNA changing, it's changing the way the genes express. So if your inflammation genes turn up, now
Yep.
you have more inflammation in the body. That's going to show up as an autoimmune disorder, which is what Crohn's was, and my
Yeah.
daughter's lung is. It also then compromises the immune system because the way the brain works is if we're under attack, we need more energy to run or fight.
Right.
So it turns down the genes that work on the immune system because we
Yep.
don't need to fix
It's all
anything.
going to your heart and lungs, your muscles, right? It's like fight the saber-tooth tiger, or, get away. That's yeah. Okay.
Yep, we only have so much energy to run so many programs. So let's turn down the programs that
Yeah.
aren't important right now. We'll deal with those later. And so it turns down the immune system, turns down the neurotransmitters, even the neuroplasticity. So people who have had trauma, they get stuck because the brain stops wanting to grow and learn. It's trying to escape. So
Mm.
all the energy is going to that fight or flight response. Now, here's the glitch that I talk about. Because the trauma keeps looping,
Yeah.
it stays stuck in that
Mm.
system.
Yeah.
And so if you don't resolve the trauma, you'll be dealing with physical and emotional issues
Mm.
for the rest of your life, which is what my daughter was dealing with. Her Crohn's was really just inflammation, but they call it Crohn's. And so and it's an autoimmune. So how do they treat it?
Mm.
Steroids. And then because she was on steroids, then she also now the neurotransmitters are compromised. So she starts getting anxious and depressed. So
Oh
now they
yeah.
have her
You
on
just
anti-anxiety. They had her on probably 250 pills a month.
no.
Yeah. It was
Oh my gosh.
insane. And so
Oh my
she's
gosh.
going from anxiety to depression to this constant feeling sick and nauseous. And then her inflammation, she can't eat.
Oh my
So
gosh.
she's losing weight. And what they said is, and that's why the reason they kept going in and cutting out the intestines is because they were dying. Now, why?
Mm.
So inflammation, there's nothing wrong with inflammation. People will say inflammation is at the root cause of everything. That's not true. It's chronic inflammation that
Yes, exactly.
when it stays on.
Yeah.
So the cells go into a cell danger response. And the cell danger response is they become hardened and inflamed to
Okay.
protect anything from penetrating the cell while it's under attack. So that's actually a good thing. So nothing can
Mm.
get into the cell, but nothing can get out of the cell. And where it showed up for my daughter was her intestinal area. And I think that's the genetic factor to it.
Mm.
So because the cells weren't circulating, they were
Right.
dying. And then they had to cut out 24 inches. Once we got the trauma resolved, she's never had a Crohn's flare up again, never had a lung
Wow.
disorder again, because the root problem was not the inflammation. That was the symptom.
Yep.
The root problem was the way trauma, and I want to explain a lot about how the brain and the trauma is working, but that was what the root problem is. So when people come into me and they say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have post-traumatic stress,
Mhm.
I say, no, that's not the problem.
Yeah.
That's the symptom of the
Yeah.
problem.
It's just your body's alerting you, your brain's alerting you like there's a problem. Yeah.
And we need to address it. So anytime you have an emotion, a feeling, or a sensation, that's your mind calling for an action.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened for you, Martha, when your father passed away, is your mind was not okay with it and it wanted to fix it, but it
Mm-hmm.
couldn't fix it. So it looked for ways to feel better. And so you started looking for other resources to
Mm-hmm.
replace that, right? The brain is
Yes.
brilliant. It was never trying
Yes.
to hurt you.
Like
And
this is not okay, right? So we have to, find
now, what it
some.
was really trying to do is get your father back, which was
Mhm.
impossible. That's
Right.
what it kept looping through, kept
Yeah.
seeing him, right, in real time, even though he wasn't there. And so it came up with another solution is find somebody else trusting and
Yes.
nurturing in a male role. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, you met a creep that took advantage of a young girl's trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the number one pandemic in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. I see it constantly.
Yeah.
And that's going to affect all those issues and it'll show up somewhere.
And I just want to say, Don, that there's been a lot over the last, several years to bring awareness to this issue specifically to mostly women, whether you want the Me Too movement, all that, but so many men have been through this and they don't have a voice as much right now. There's a lot of shame associated with being a survivor of sexual abuse or sexual assault at whatever age. And this is, I think, it impedes a lot of men getting the relief and the healing that they need. And they find many other ways to try and bring relief, but they're not working, they're temporary. So I just want to acknowledge that. Oftentimes I share my story of being a survivor of sexual abuse and sexual assault, sexual abuse as a child and sexual assault as an adult. And people right away say after my keynote speeches, like, you're going to help a lot of women. And I'm like, this is about people. And there's a lot of men who have been through this, but they don't want to say it to another human being. So the first step that I share is like shining a light on what it is that you've been through without shame. All progress starts by telling the truth. Our friend Dan Sullivan says all the time, right? And so not easy to do, but I just want to encourage everyone listening that this is happening to men too. And there's many men watching that this has happened to. There is a path for you to heal. So I want to encourage people. We're going to talk about solutions here. We've been talking about the problem for a while, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm sure you see that with people coming in to you for help.
You'd be surprised. People would be shocked at the numbers. And I never had anything happen to me, so I was really unaware. When we talked about that, my awareness was really zero growing up. I didn't know that my friends were being sexually abused. We had two teachers at our school, two principals, a guy who ran our little league for 35 years, and those were my male friends, right? So how
Yeah.
many of
Yeah.
the females,
Who
right?
have told you about it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's everywhere. And they talk about, oh, one out of, eight boys and I think one out of six girls. And no,
Who
it's not.
knows?
It's way
It's
higher
higher
than
than
that.
that. It's higher
But
than
they
that.
just don't want it because there's so much shame and guilt. It happened to my
Mhm.
wife. She admitted it to me when I first met her, right? Because she wanted to be honest
Yeah.
with me. But then she swore me to secrecy.
Yes.
I could never tell anybody. And that I was like, why? Right.
Right.
But I
No,
didn't
that's
understand it.
exactly what my journey was. At the time told one person related to the coach. I just didn't want anyone to know. Weirdly, I mean, there was also fear because once I started really waking up to what was happening, it was threatening. There was fear associated with this. But still, like even after I really integrated and healed from it, I still didn't want people to know. I would maybe tell someone I was in a close, intimate relationship with. It took me decades to tell my family. And so it's understandable. Now, I mean, now I share it I share it all the time because I'm at a place where I know this is part of my calling is to be a light for others and to help, shine a light for a path for healing for them, whether they went through something traumatic this morning or 40 years ago, that there is a path for healing. You may feel this perpetrator took so much of you. Don't let them take today is my message. Don't let them rob you of today. You already feel they robbed you of so much, but don't let them rob you of today. There is a path for healing. I want to ask you about, we're talking a lot about healing trauma from the past. And again, we'll get into the healing. We're talking right now about the trauma.
Right.
So everybody stay tuned. We do have the ability to make sure trauma doesn't get stuck in us if we experienced it today in the now. I just went through this, a traumatic experience of being attacked. And I just announced to the world, I'm committed to making sure this trauma doesn't get stuck in me. What tools do you have that you share for people to use just to, not have it get stuck in you? You're seeing and helping people that have it stuck in them from the past. But if something happened to somebody today or this week, like what can they do in order to allow their body and their brain to process it healthfully so that they are able to, shake it off in the way that humans can?
It's pretty much the same kind of a process. The key is, and this is where the glitch comes in.
Yeah.
And this is what, when we started doing brain mapping on people, we did a brain map prior to them going through our program and then after.
Okay.
And one of the things that we saw in the brain map is the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, which is the visual cortex.
Yeah.
That's what's processing information.
Yep.
People who are experiencing post-traumatic stress, whether that came from a sexual assault or veterans, that occipital lobe is lit up. It's very active. So what does that mean? It means they're viewing something. So they're continuing to view the memory and they're viewing it in real time. So once we get them through so really the idea is, I say, we have to take that high definition memory that was stored about that traumatic event and get your mind to restore it into the same format as to what you ate for dinner last night. Take the intensity out of it. So we're not eliminating the memory. We're not doing what Henry Molaison did, was eliminate the memories.
Right.
What we're doing is we're going from, like the Wizard of Oz was shot in black and white and then colorized. We're doing the opposite. We're going from the color version to the black and white version. And then it won't activate the nervous system.
Yeah, no, I get that from trauma from the past, but if it happened to someone this morning, are there tools that they can use? I mean, I think God gave us tools for us to be able to normally process and heal so that it doesn't get stuck in us. Are there things people can do to ensure it's not suppressed and stuck, or it's not destined to be stuck, right? Like, what are the best practices?
No.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. The earlier you can get to it, the better.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of process. The best thing to do in that kind of a situation is to work with somebody who's a professional, because your mind will not want to process that traumatic memory.
Yeah.
It's still highly stressed. So if you just tried on your own to say, okay, I'm going to try to get this through my mind, I'm going to try to get through all of this, you're going to be in a very high beta brainwave state trying to do that. What I do in my process, which you know about, is I get them into a very safe place, an alpha brainwave state. And if you can do that really fast, really right after, the brain will, exactly what you just said, will process the same way as it will the old trauma. It'll take that high definition memory and process it and take it out of high definition.
So I've so many questions or things I want to, there's a lot of little angles I want to take here, but from my own experience, right after I was assaulted by this man who stalked me for close to a mile, we now know, didn't realize it at the time, passed me on a pedestrian bridge, turned around, put on a stocking cap, started following me from a distance until he went in and jumped me from behind. I mean, I was, despite all the growth and the tools that I have, I was in a heightened adrenaline state for 72 hours because I continued on my speaking engagements, which was not easy to do, but I decided I was speaking about, living with bravery and not being, held back by fear or traumatic events. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Stay in my hotel and cry? I'm just going to come and serve and share with people But I said to them, I'm in a heightened adrenaline state right now. I am going to have to process this, and I will, and I'm committed to. And part of my accountability to do that was I ended up, making a little video of myself a few hours after the assault happened when I was safe back in my hotel room. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to post this on social media for two reasons. One is because a lot of people have been through awful things and I want to encourage them on their journey. And I just decided I'm going to share my journey real time of processing and healing. The second was to hold myself accountable that I didn't contract. And I didn't, when it got really uncomfortable, which it has, that I didn't have it get stuck in me, in that process. So that kind of, as we've gone through, the very heightened state, I continued to travel and speak, and then finally came home and collapsed and got sick. And it's been a bit of, a journey since then, to ensure that it's not gotten stuck in me. But one thing I definitely want you to explain the different brain waves really quick. But before I do that, before I forget, we have talked about sexual abuse and sexual assault and the things that so many people have come through. You've shared a beautiful, and you might not have it in front of you, but just the concept of he touched my body, but he didn't touch me.
Yeah.
And I believe this is a spiritual element as well, because the divine essence of who we are is not our bodies. This is just a physical vessel, but also our cells are regenerating over time. So if something happened in the distant past, like literally, he didn't physically touch the same cells that are those body parts for you right now because they've regenerated. But can you just share? I just think this helps bring hope to people and a reminder to center themselves, like that concept, because I just really think it's a beautiful concept that they touched my body, but they didn't touch me, the divine essence of who I am.
Yeah. One of the things that I just wanted to mention about you as well, I think because you had so much knowledge, you were able to process that better than most. This is why this is so valuable. And what you can help people with is if you're aware that you can heal.
Yes.
Had you ever thought about that before you knew everything you know now? You always would thought, I'm going to be a victim. I'm going to have to live with this for the rest of my life. And that's what I tell people. You don't have to live with this. This is an event that happened that we can heal it. And the
Yes.
fact that you had that knowledge, I think was very powerful for you. You could still go out and talk because you knew I'm going to fix it.
I'm going to be healed. I'm not a victim. This is not going to stop me. Exactly. This
Yeah.
is actually going to be for good in a bizarre way. People may not understand that. There's a in the Old Testament, the story of Joseph, and he says, what others intended for evil, God used for good. And I see it as, I did a past year review recently, and every single day I reviewed what happened on the calendar and my photos, and I identified whether it was a peak positive, peak negative, or neutral day. And I mean, this just happened to me, about 8 weeks ago. And I actually was debating, well, was that a peak negative day, the day I got attacked? Because technically I've turned it into positive and I'm going to help a lot of people. And then I was like, all right, Martha, let's get back down to earth. That was a peak negative day. I put it as a negative, even though I've turned it into a positive. I'm not going to be like that, power of, positive thinking, that I'm not going to say being attacked is a negative thing. Right. So, anyway, talk about, he touched my body, but he didn't touch
And
me.
this is one of the things that I feel is very, very important. For example, I'll give you a quick example to a lady who came in, and the first thing she did when she sat down, she gave me this laundry list of all the things that had happened to her. She wanted to get all this out. And when she had finished, she'd been about 15 minutes. She was just going on and on about these different stories. And so I said to her, I said, is there anything else? And she sort of looked at me and she goes,
isn't that enough?
that's exactly what she said. Isn't that a lot? And I said, it is a lot. I said, however, for the last 15 minutes, I've learned a lot about what happened to you, but I haven't learned anything about you. So let's start talking about who you are. And that's the concept with this is we're not our experiences. We're not a body. We're energy,
Yes.
right? We have this energy and our essence, our light is who we are.
Yes.
And that's what we're born with. And so when I talk to people who had a sexual assault, I'll give you an example of a little 12-year-old girl who had really had tremendous, I mean, it was horrible. They had to take her out of the home. It was family abuse, really bad. And so when I sat her down, as I said, repeat after me, I have a hand, I have a foot, I have a leg, I have a body. She repeats this with me.
Yeah.
I said, however, I'm not a body. The body I was born with doesn't exist.
Mm.
The body they touched no longer exists. They never touched my essence and my light. That's
Yes.
who I am, right? That's always protected. And
Yes.
so I said, say this, they touched my body, they never touched me. Martha, she jumped up, right? She goes, they never touched me. I said, no, they
Wow.
never touched you. She goes, they touched my body, but they didn't touch me.
Wow.
That was so healing. Her mom was sitting outside and heard her laughing, and she's thinking, like, how can she be laughing? Because she knew what she was
Right.
coming to talk
Yeah.
about. She comes out, and as soon as she walks out the door, she says, and this is her adopted mom, not the mom from the family. She walks out, she goes, Mom, they never touched me. And
Ah,
so strong with such conviction,
yes.
right? And that's
It's
what
so
everybody needs to
beautiful.
understand. Yeah.
People need to realize I talk about this all the time. It is my conviction to share with the world. What we say after the words, I am, is a declaration of who we are, of our identity, of our energy. It's spiritual, it's energetic, it's emotional, and it impacts our decisions, it impacts our outcomes in our lives. And we often answer, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm a father, I'm a mother. No, that's not who you are. And so you're not the roles that you're in. Those are important roles. You're not your body. You're not your feelings.
Nope.
Sometimes people will say, I am,
I'm
afraid. I
anxious.
am. No. You feel afraid.
Yeah.
I am is a deeper, deeper essence. It's the spirit that you were before you took on a body and will remain, when you shed this body. And I'm not trying to get into religious beliefs here, but it's true. We each have that divine essence. And for anyone who's been through something difficult, connecting with that divine essence of who you truly are, and then this beautiful truth that whatever you have been through, they didn't touch you. Oh, that's powerful.
It really is. And you just see people when I take them through that. And that's why I always, what I'll ask them beforehand, can you tell me about a time in your life that you were outdoors, you were somewhere in nature, and you just saw
Yeah.
this magnificent event?
Yeah.
I have them describe it. And this
Mm,
is before I ever get into that.
yeah.
So I say, what was happening in that moment? So, people say Grand Canyon. Oh, I was at the
Yeah.
Grand Canyon. I saw the sunset.
And how did
That's
you
when
feel? Yeah.
that's when you recognized who you are.
Touch the divine. You were
That's your
connected.
essence in your light.
Yeah.
That's the energy in you.
Yeah.
And as Albert Einstein said, energy can never be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Energy lives on forever.
Yes.
And so your energy will live on, your body will die. It's designed to die, right? But your energy never dies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why whenever I think about my parents or anybody who's passed away, I never feel sad. I
Yeah.
know their energy still exists, right?
Yep.
And
And I just want to say that whole he touched my body, but he didn't touch me. That was impactful for me after this last assault. Cause I mean, he molested me all over my body as I fought him off and was able to get him off and stop something much worse from happening. But that is violating. And even though I have all the tools cerebrally, spiritually, emotionally to move forward, that was a part of my processing just to be like, reminding myself and grounding myself, like he did not take anything from me. He didn't take anything.
nope.
And so thank you. I think that's beautiful. And I know that's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Can we talk about brain waves in
Yep.
layman's terms here so
Sure.
people can understand a little bit about alpha, beta, theta, and then we'll get into everybody's tune in. We'll get into like I want to talk about what's broken with the current mental health system and medical system. This will be controversial, and then get into like what can be done, like the hope for healing for people and freedom.
Perfect. So what we do is we do brain mapping with people. So you have basically four brainwave states. There's a fifth state that people will say gamma, but I'm going to talk about the four ones that are really operating on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
You have beta, which is running about 15 to 30 hertz or cycles per second. So think of it as if you're on a bike, you're riding pretty fast. You're processing a lot of data in beta.
Okay.
When you move into alpha, you're between 7 and 14 hertz or cycles per second. So that's where the mind is very relaxed, but very focused. That's where you want to be living. When you're in an alpha brainwave state, you're super relaxed and focused. They
Okay.
believe Albert Einstein lived in that state a lot. But
Mm.
that's the flow state.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you want to be in flow.
Yeah.
When you go into theta, theta is between 4 and 7 hertz. And when you go to sleep at night and you start to dream, you're in a dominant theta
Theta
brainwave
state.
state,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And when you go below 4 hertz, you move into delta, and delta is dreamless sleep. And that's where the maintenance is getting done.
Okay.
So that's that deep sleep. If you're not, and now if you've got a lot of trauma, here's where the issue comes in.
You're not going to get deep sleep.
The mind is still processing trauma
Mm.
from your childhood. It's not okay with it and it wants to fix it. It just doesn't understand it can't fix it. It's seeing it in real time. So if there was a real threat, doesn't it make sense that your system would get activated? It makes perfect sense. Memory
Yeah.
is seen as real. So it keeps activating your
Yeah.
nervous system and your mind's trying to fix it. So ever since you were 12, your mind had been trying to say, don't let dad die. Do something. We can see it. I had
Yeah.
a young lady come in, 12 years of age. She had been Baker acted 3 times for suicide attempts. And so when we sat down, they said, we don't know what to do. The father had to get his work to allow him to stay home. They pulled her out of school. They couldn't leave her alone. And so when we went back over her childhood, what happened is when she was 5, her mother died. And then her father remarried a year later and had 2 more children. So she was one of 3.
Okay.
And her mom was a great mom. She loved her mom. No problem with that.
Yeah.
But what had happened is she says, I remember when I was 5, I didn't know why everybody was crying. I thought my mom's coming back, right? Why is everybody so sad? This is what a 5-year-old's interpreting. All of a sudden, probably when she was 11, 12, it hit her. Mom's not coming back. The subconscious realized this isn't working. And so there's where I said, I don't believe you ever wanted to take your life. You wanted to stop the pain.
Yes.
Right? Your mind couldn't fix it. It kept trying to fix it. And so if your mind's constantly calling you into an action, do something, don't let it happen, but you can't resolve it. Your brain's going to try to come up with a way to stop the pain. And because your subconscious operates in real time, it sees no consequences to actions. It can't see time.
Yeah.
So suicide was a resource.
Wow.
Stop the pain. And I said, that's not what you were trying to do. You were trying to stop the pain. Once we got to the root of what it was, then we were able to process that for her. And so she was able to go back to school. They didn't have to watch her. But that's why they Baker acted her, because she was threatening suicide.
Wow. Wow.
And that's how
Boomer
powerful
showed
the
up
brain
on
is.
my lap here and he's snoring out loud. So in
I
case.
don't think we can hear him.
All right, good. Wow.
So those are the kinds of things that people, the awareness, once we get to understand, like for example, when people come in and they say, I'm depressed, and I'll say, tell me what you're angry about. And they'll go, well, I'm not angry, I'm depressed. And I go, depression's anger.
Yeah, it's actually just protecting you from the anger and
Trying to get you into an action.
Yeah.
Don't let something happen, fix it. So if your mind keeps calling you into an action by using anger, but you never answer the call, how does your mind protect you? It shuts down. It goes into a depressed state. Depression is the absence of emotions. So your mind came up with a way to protect you.
Yeah. Well, and so many people, they're using addictions to stop the pain, right? We're looking for ways to stop the pain, even if it's not consciously. And again, I think back to my own experiences. I was using running was a release for me, exercise. And there are many positive attributes to that, but I also would sometimes like run, like Forrest Gump, like run to basically like numb myself and like shut some of the volatility down. So things can be positive, but to an extreme, they actually can be. Exercise is like a socially acceptable addiction, right? It's not the way people are, would view drug abuse or alcoholism. But the reality is it's a pain problem, and people are trying to stop the suffering. They got the glitch going on and they're just trying to soothe themselves, which is why they're going to these other substances. I'm
Yeah.
simplifying it, but
But
yeah.
100% right. What you were doing was chemically changing your brain,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
is what they do with medication.
Yeah.
But you were doing it naturally.
Yeah.
Everybody, I mean, thank God you went that route.
Yeah.
Right? So you were doing what you weren't able to
Yeah.
do yet is shut the pain off. So you came up with a resource, a
Yeah.
brilliant resource to chemically change your brain. Just like
Mm-hmm.
a drug, it's going to help, but it's not going to last.
Exactly. So then
And
you
you
just
would
got to
have to
keep
run again.
running. So now I'm running marathons and I'm running Ironmans. Like just keep going. Again, it has benefits when brought into balance. That if you're needing, getting outside to de-stress, to process, like within balance, exercise can be something that's important for you. But to an extreme, it was just helping me cope.
Well, what's amazing, I had a lady come in 7 years on heroin. She said to me, I told my therapist I was coming in to see you, and he told me I have to be honest with you and let you know up front that I have self-destructive behavior. So I just smiled at her and I said, really, what would make you think you're self-destructive? And she looks at me, she goes, I'm
Wow.
sticking a needle in my arm with heroin. You don't think that's self-destructive?
Oh my
I
gosh.
said, no, it's not. I says, I think you're trying to feel better. And I
Yeah.
bet you when you stuck the needle in your arm, you felt better. She goes, yeah. I said, that's what you're trying to do. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
substance is destructive. You're
Right.
not destructive. Your
Right.
mind wants a solution to the pain, and the heroin provided the solution to the pain. When does it want the pain to stop? Now.
No. Yeah.
Does it see a consequence to that?
No.
It has no connection to time. So it solved the problem now.
Right now. Yeah.
That's why you get stuck. Addiction is a code, it's not a disease.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you repeat it, the second memory system that Boomer has and we have is that associative repetitive memory.
Yeah.
The more you repeat it, you're building a code.
Mm-hmm.
And so then your brain says, what do we do when we feel this pain? Do we have a resource? Oh, yes, we do. It goes to the code. And then you can't stop it.
Yep. And this is, so many people. I mean, thank God, other than running, I've not had this challenge, but so many people struggle with addiction. They're like, today I'm not going to do it. And then they just continue to do the behavior that they were willing that they weren't going to do because they need relief from the suffering. Our good friend Joe Polish is very passionate about this and has the foundation Genius Recovery and the intent to, uh, you know,
Stigmatized.
destigmatize addiction
Yeah.
in order to be able to help people because they're just trying to soothe their pain. So again,
And
so
that's what
many
I
people
say
are,
to them. It's not
yeah.
about your morals, character, willpower,
Mhm.
ethics. It's about pain. And
Pain.
pain is the greatest motivator to
Mhm.
stop something. Our minds don't like to be in pain, and it will figure out whatever it can. That's how people can do sometimes what looks like a crazy thing. You'd say, why are you going and doing that? Right? Well, it's
Yeah.
not the logical part of the brain. If the logical part of the brain was in charge, there would never be an
Yeah,
addicted person.
of course. Yeah. But that's
It's a
just not what's
survival
driving it.
brain.
It's the survival part. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's so many people out there who are in mental health, counseling, therapy, because they went that route because they really want to help people. They went through their own experiences maybe, and out of compassion, they wanted to be, a vessel of healing, and grateful for their intention. But the system is broken, from my view. Our mental health system is broken. And for people feeling like if I want to give them hope. We've talked a lot about what's happening and what's glitching and what we do in order to stop our pain. But now let's move forward with hopeful, like, okay, what do I do about it? And I think if people at the beginning of the year, they're thinking about like, I want change now. I'm tired of the life that I'm living. And then they think like, oh, what am I doing? Am I signing up for decades of, therapy and the cost and what that means? There's different modalities and paths that people can take, but the system right now, from my view, keeps people stuck in their symptoms. The mental health system doesn't even address trauma as any sort of diagnosis, which is crazy. Most of the roots of these issues are trauma, but they keep trying to rearrange deck chairs on the sinking Titanic, as opposed to getting to the root issue behind the manifestations, or putting people on medicine and just trying to shut them down so that they're on drugs. So can you just give people hope? What is it that you're doing to be able to help people? What does it look like? How can they find healing and freedom?
I think the advantage for me is I came in as an entrepreneur to fix a problem for my daughter. So even though I had to go through all the education of it, I said it's not working. Nobody had really helped my daughter. Did
Yeah.
they care about helping my daughter? Sure they did. They're caring people. They got into the
Yeah.
profession because they want to help.
Right. Their motives and intentions are good for the
Yeah.
most part. I would say there are exceptions probably, but
Yeah, but if you're trained one way and the whole system is training you one way, you can't, like, for example, with the doctor with my daughter, she had a cyst formed on her ovary. He comes in, he has to remove the cyst in the ovary. That actually came because of the overuse of steroids, which I just started to find out in my research. But after he removed it, he said, comes in the room and he goes, I don't understand this. Your chart says you have Crohn's. And she goes, yeah, I have Crohn's. He goes, there's no evidence you have Crohn's. She goes, no, I haven't had a flare up in a while. He goes, but you're not on medication for Crohn's. She goes, no, I don't
they
take
can't
medication.
handle it.
He couldn't. He said, well, he said, I hate to tell you this, you've never had Crohn's. And she goes, no, I've had 4 resections done. And so he goes, well, Crohn's doesn't go away. So I explained to him that I
Yeah.
believe that the
According
trauma
to his
loop,
med school training.
yeah, and he's a smart guy, he doesn't go through med
Yeah.
school, right? Because he's an
Yeah.
idiot.
Right.
So he's got a lot of really good training. Unfortunately, it's wrong.
Mm,
So nobody had ever shown him that the trauma
yeah.
creates the inflammation, which then compromises the system. So once we get to, but then the problem was, once I discovered that is, what are we going to do about the trauma now?
Yeah.
So the key is to be able to get the trauma out of that high definition into a format that you can recall it. So one of the most extreme examples, I worked with a U.S. Army sniper who said, he shot and killed a 12-year-old boy. He said, I can't live with myself. For 8 years, he'd be in the VA, just medicated. And so, I took him through the whole program. And what he said was, how can I talk about this now and I'm not shaking and crying? He says, what did you do?
Mm,
And I said, I didn't do anything. It's your own system reset,
mm,
took the high definition memory into a format that you can now process without activating your nervous system. I said, for 8 years, your mind has been trying to get you not to pull the trigger because it
mm,
thought you were shooting a 12-year-old boy. So when he tried to talk about it, what is his mind looking at? I'm pulling the trigger and shooting this boy.
mm.
And what does his mind say? Stop it.
Shut down. Yeah.
Don't do it. Well, he can't not do it. He already did it 8 years earlier.
Mm,
So there's where the glitch comes in that I talk about. Now, here's where the issue comes in for traditional therapy. If you have a memory like that, a high definition memory, what brainwave state were you in? Beta,
beta. Yeah.
high beta, tremendous amounts of data coming into that memory. So you go in and sit down and talk to your therapist, and they start wanting to talk to you about this and see what we can do about it. What brainwave state are you going to be in when you're talking about it? Beta.
Beta. Yeah.
How do you fix beta and beta? There's no counter to it. You have to have a counter brainwave state. So that's why I use the 4-hour program, because within about 2 hours, I have you in a natural alpha brainwave, alpha theta brainwave state where the mind will now take that high definition beta memory and process it into the dominant state that it's in, which is alpha theta.
Mm,
Now it takes all the intensity. So it's basically just decolorizing it. And it's
mm-hmm,
all natural. It's your own system doing it. I'm
mm,
just guiding it through it and letting it do it. That's why then he could talk about it, because his mind is not seeing all that definition. And it's not unusual for people to say to me, I'm even having a hard time recalling some of that information now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing, Don, just to clarify, you have a 4-hour process versus decades of therapy and drugs that are not necessarily helping people. Again, not trying to make broad statements about, some people have been able to gain support, but you have one 4-hour process
And then
that,
30 days of audios that
and
they
then 30 days of audios after that. And so, but in that process, one thing I think worth sharing is like, you're not going to make people walk through the gory details of the whole event. And then what happened? And then what happened? And then what happened? You're going, I'm going to let you say it in your words. You're going to have them once they're in a alpha state, kind of bring it to mind is probably not the right way to say it, but in a way that is, the movie trailer or other ways to describe it probably better, so that they don't have to share it all with you is the point. Some people don't want to tell another person about all the details of what they experienced or what they did, because sometimes the shame is based on their own actions as well, like the sniper. So can you clarify that? Because that actually is impactful for people like, oh, I don't have to get into it all with them. I really don't want to have to tell this all. And then there's 4 hours, and then they are listening, tuning in on their own time to 30 days of audios in order to help. So can you just kind of walk through what all entails? And then what results have you been getting?
Yeah, the 4 hours, basically 2 hours is all the education and science, almost what we're talking about, so that I want them to understand that there's a way to fix this and heal. They don't need to live and manage and cope with it. The current system is about living, managing, and coping with your symptoms.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, why would you have fear? Fear is a call for an action. What action can you take about what happened to you 5 years ago? Nothing. So let's get that reset. So then when we get into the actual event, I'll say, there's a couple different ways that would look, but I'm looking for a movie trailer. If that was a movie, they were going to make a movie about that day in your life or that event in your life, I want the trailer. I want about a minute, 2-minute highlight reel. I just need you to visually bring it up, and I take you through some techniques that get your mind to reset it automatically for you. I don't even need to know what it is. Quite often, sometimes I'll come home and my wife will say, so who did you have in today? And I'll say, well, there was a lady came in today, and she goes, well, was it a serious thing? I have no idea. I don't know what she had.
But you were just a vessel for her to bring it up to herself.
Yep. Because even my own wife, Bridget, couldn't tell me about some of the things that she'd experienced. And so it was, even as safe as I was to be with, but she still couldn't talk about it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So I have either visually, right?
Yeah.
I have a couple different techniques. One I have where I just say, tell me what happened in a new language. And they'll go, what language? And I'll say, I'm going to teach you a new language today, and it's called flowing. And there's only one word in the flowing language, and it's flowing. So every word is flowing, flowing, flowing. So even though you're saying flowing, even to say flowing, you have to go into memory, because you have to try to remember it. As you're visually, that's the occipital lobe that I was talking about. When we get the occipital lobe starting to view the memory, and then I have you in a very relaxed, calm state, it'll reprocess it. And it's that quick.
Just to also clarify, like the woman who came in and gave you the whole, rap list of everything she's been through, this. People don't need to, with your modality, do a session for every single, separately issue or trauma. So talk a little bit about your understanding of what happens with this kind of processing and what happens after it to maybe other traumas that weren't brought up in the movie trailer.
Yeah. So I generally work on 3, sometimes more, but very seldom, 2 or 3 events. Once we start the process of this memory consolidation, the thalamus, which is the part of the brain that's the relay center, continues at nighttime. They know the thalamus is still operating at nighttime. It's relaying more information through the hippocampus for this reprocessing. So even events that we never talked about, your mind is continuing to process other events. So I've had a lot of people say, don't I have to go through each event? And I say, no, because once we get the process started, right, just like the mind and body is designed to heal. So what's interfering with it healing is it's stuck, and it's gotten stuck in a fight or flight mode. It doesn't want to do maintenance. If you're being chased by a bear and you're running on jagged rocks in bare feet, you're not going to feel anything. You're going to be constantly able to run at full speed. When you get away from the bear, now the maintenance can start. But as long as you have this unresolved trauma and you're being chased, your mind will not consolidate the rest of that memory until we get it started. And then it feels safe enough to continue the process.
I'd love to hear about your results. Like, do you have data or case studies about this particular concept of like the rest of the stuff gets resolved because you've now defragged your operating system, to use your language? The rest of the stuff is just getting resolved. Like, can you share some stories or data related to that?
Yeah. So we're doing another study right now on the DNA. So that's going to be published very soon, that we're actually changing the gene expression and methylation. I did brain mapping studies pre and post. What we saw was the people on pre, and I had some really tough cases. They gave me some of the really hard cases who were not responding to other treatments.
Yeah.
And so we found that we got a 46% change in brain plasticity. That's the ability of the brain to, that was the average amongst the study. That was from 15-year-olds to people in their 60s, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all of that. And so what that means is the brain has the ability now to grow and adapt. When it was in that fight or flight mode, it doesn't want to do that. They were blown away that we could get that much change that quick. But it's the ability to heal. And so that's all we need to do. So I'll give you an example of an individual. She came in multiple sexual assaults when she was a child. We worked on 3, and she said to me, she's, well, we're gonna be here all night because I have a lot of these. And I said, we don't need to do any more. She goes, well, don't we have to go through each one? She says, I know we did 3. And I said, we don't have to do any more. Your mind will continue to process the rest of that data for you. She goes, even if we haven't talked about it. I said, yes. She goes, okay. A month later, I ran into her at a store, and she comes up to me and she says, Dr. Wood, I got to share something with you. She says, I went home, and for the first time in my life, I sat down with my husband and shared what happened to me as a child. I never had told him, right? He just thought I was dealing with all these things, didn't know why. She goes, and it was so healing for us as a couple.
Wow.
She says, it was very powerful. She says, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't believe you when you told me my mind would clear everything else up. She says, I thought I'll be back. She says, but I went to Universal Studios with my husband and my daughter. And she says, and I was riding on the escalator with my daughter and husband, and I was looking over the railing, and my daughter said, Mom, look at what you're doing. She goes, I never told you I had a fear of heights, and my fear of heights is gone. She goes, that's what convinced me that everything else was clearing up, because we never discussed it. I never even told you about it. Right? That's the brilliance of our brain. Our brain is we're learning more and more about how brilliant this device is. And that's why I don't like the fact that we're chemically changing it. We're trying to put, like, to me, that's the lobotomies of the 50s. We're going in there and chemically changing it. What you were doing when you were running was producing a natural neurotransmitter in your brain called anandamide. And anandamide is the precursor to the release of serotonin, the bliss molecule. So what you were doing is naturally helping yourself without chemically changing it. Now, if they put in a chemical to try to do that, your brain is capable of doing that. You could do running, exercise, even dark chocolate will produce anandamide, right? And you'll feel better. That's what we need to be teaching people, to naturally heal themselves. And you've been on this journey for a long time. So you're fortunate to be able to have done a lot of this.
Yeah, I have. I feel like I now better understand, the tools that I was using by the grace of God in order to help me heal. I now understand them intellectually better. They're like, oh, that now makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Dark chocolate is a good
It's
tool
a
for
good
that
one.
too, right?
It does. It just
So,
naturally does it. And this is, for
yeah,
example, even people in addiction, what I say to them, so the girl who'd be on heroin, I said, what if I could show you a way that you don't need the heroin,
yeah.
right, to feel better? She
Hmm.
goes, well, that would be amazing. I said, of course, your conscious mind knows that.
Yeah.
We just got to convince your subconscious that you can do this naturally. She
Hmm.
hasn't touched any of that after going through the program.
Wow.
And so we've
That's,
got a lot of
yeah.
examples of people who have gone through the program. And what I explained to them, for example, a simple one like cigarettes. So
Hmm.
when people say, I want to quit smoking, I say, tell me what you're addicted to. And they're going to say nicotine, and they say nicotine's harder to get off of than heroin. And I say, so tell me how nicotine is working. Well, the body will crave the nicotine. And I say, well, tell me how the body craves it. See, nobody ever goes that far,
Yeah. Right.
right? But that was the way my mind worked. Why would the body crave a foreign substance? That doesn't make any sense. If the body would crave anything, the body would crave water. But we don't have waterholics and we don't have water
Hmm.
rehab centers, right? And
Hmm.
yet we're probably all a little dehydrated. It's the brain that wants it. Why
Mm.
does the brain want it? To feel better. But
Right.
here's the actual chemical change that happens. When you take a puff on a cigarette, the nicotine enters the bloodstream and hits the brain within 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, the brain thinks nicotine has almost the exact chemical compound of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a precursor to the release of dopamine.
Hmm.
So when the nicotine hits the receptors in the brain goes, oh, that's acetylcholine, dump
Hmm.
some dopamine.
Yeah.
I said, what is
Dopamine's like the craving reward
the
chemical,
reward?
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
so what happened?
serotonin, just, again, layman's term, serotonin is like the bliss.
Bliss is what makes you feel
And then
good,
oxytocin is the connection
bonding one.
chemical, right?
Yep. So if your brain thinks the nicotine is acetylcholine, right? Can't you just do it without the nicotine? Yes. So I said, what you're addicted to is feeling good.
Hmm.
You're not addicted to nicotine.
Yeah, that's
You're
just the
addicted to
tool you're
feeling,
using in order to get get
to
the
get the
chemical
dopamine
response. Yeah.
release. But you could do that. And that's what you were doing naturally, is getting the serotonin release by doing the exercise. And so
Mm,
you were chemically changing your brain totally naturally. The
mm,
only the only next step you needed was to get the trauma loop to stop. And then you didn't need, I mean, not that you didn't
mhm.
want to keep running, but you didn't need the
Yeah.
constant bliss, right?
Yeah.
If that trauma loop's not running every day.
And I felt like, again, in my own words, I needed to kind of reintegrate. I had just disconnected my heart from my head and my spirit a bit, and that's understandable. It's a survival mechanism, but reconnecting all that together, even for, again, living all of life in the present with its ups and downs. Like if you're trying to avoid future pain, sure, you can try to disconnect, but then you'll miss out potentially on these negative feelings, but you also miss out on all the positive, right? The joy, the love, the
Yep.
bliss that goes with that. So I would rather live fully open to all that life has to offer and have the tools to process and heal from the negative and be fully present than shut it down and live in a place that's flatlined, if that makes sense. And people numb themselves with different substances or just their way of life. But yeah, I mean, reintegrating for me and healing is a key part of my journey.
Yeah.
So
And you were able to do that very effectively. Not everybody can. So some people will get into drugs and alcohol
mhm.
because they need a band-aid solution quickly, right?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I know we got to wrap up, but I feel like here's the mighty A-10 Warthog that I flew here, which
That
is
is so cool.
amazing, badass plane.
It
And
is.
here's one of the bullets,
I'm
30
that's
millimeter bullets. Just
holy.
to clarify, let me put the plane down for a second. Here's a smart water bottle, 1 liter, so people can get a sense of it. Um,
Wow.
But I mean, in addition to that, honestly, the professional route I took, like flying in combat in this thing, single seat, forced me to be living in the present a lot, right? You can't be thinking about like what happened in the past, what happened this morning. And like, it forced me to be in a flow state and in the present in order to be able to perform. And I actually think those tools help me in a beautiful way, if that makes sense. In the interim, to not self-destruct as I found my path of healing. But as I wrap up, I know this has been an awesome conversation. I often in my keynote speeches talk about the importance of dropping the drag. And the term I mean by that is when you're flying aerodynamically, we want to make sure that we are slick and we don't have drag on our plane. It's an aerodynamic term. Drag is actually something that slows us down and takes up fuel. And so I encourage people to be honest with themselves about what drag may be slowing them down and taking up fuel in their life that maybe they're conscious of and maybe they're not. Maybe they only see the symptoms. Maybe they can't connect right away with the root, but they know like there's something holding me back. I am living in fear. I'm living in regret. I'm living in unforgiveness. I'm living in anger, whatever it is. Like this is drag that is holding me down from taking off and flying in my life. And life is too short for you to be flying with so much drag on you. You can be free. You can live fully alive. You can be healed. You can be whole. You can live the life you desire and you deserve. For everyone who's listening, this is your year. This is your year to drop that drag. This is your year to heal from that trauma, big T or little t. And the path that you take will be your journey, but commit first that you will take that journey, that you know that there is healing available. That takes courage. That first step really takes courage and commitment to say, not anymore. I'm not letting these things hold me back anymore. I'm not letting this drag slow me down anymore. And it's been awesome talking to my friend, Dr. Don Wood, about what he's doing, to help people on their path. Don, anything else you want to share, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, here's something that I think you'll really be interested in. This is the secret to what Martha did, right? Is when you were doing what you were doing, there's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex.
Okay.
That part of the brain, when anybody who's watching this, look it up and you'll see what it does. When you go out of your way to do something that you really don't want to do and you do it, you're building and strengthening that. So this isn't things that
lot in my life.
But that's why you're able to accomplish what you did. You built that muscle in that part of the brain that says, I don't want to do this. I don't. So this isn't going after reward stuff. This is going after stuff that you go, I don't like this, but I'm going to do it.
Doing it anyway.
When you can do that, and that was the magic for you. So the message that if you listen to what Martha's telling you right now is follow what she did. It's not easy to go out of your way to do things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Your mind will try to stop you.
Yes.
You did it anyway. So that part of the brain was becoming so strong that every time you got into another situation, that anterior cingulate cortex was able to do it again because it knew how to do it. And so
that makes total sense.
magic.
Again, in my coaching and my keynotes, I talk about do things afraid. That courage is not the absence of fear. It's actually choosing to do things afraid in the midst of the fear. I think it was Dan Sullivan who said, courage is doing what you need to do with wet pants, right? And so, but the way I talk about it is just like an athlete and muscle memory. I wasn't using the chemical, brain. I don't usually teach to that level, but that when you feel uncomfortable, you feel that fear, that truly you're safe. Just to be clear, this isn't running away from an actual threat. Like you feel uncomfortable. You're usually on the edge of growth. It's usually the very thing you're resisting is the thing that you need to do in order to continue to grow and thrive. And when you choose to do it anyway, then you expand. Then you actually build your courage and your confidence, and you're like, wow, the fear didn't have that much power over me anyway. And then you actually literally are expanding your capabilities and your confidence. And then you get more comfortable. The next time you feel that feeling, you're like, I know that feeling. you are not going to have power over me. And you then continue to like a runner, you just keep getting stronger and stronger in that loop. Similarly, people, again, I'm not using scientific, this is just experiential. People can get stuck in a loop of, I feel the fear, I give into the fear, I contract, you give the fear power, and then it has more power of you. And then you're in a familiar muscle memory of that loop of feeling uncomfortable, but not doing what you need to do, if that makes sense. I may have just botched up all the
No,
science
no.
on that, but I've seen this in my life and people who I coach, people who I've encouraged along the way, that it's the first step is doing things afraid or being comfortable, being uncomfortable, taking those steps, finding the wingman and the path and the modalities. You don't have to fly solo, just to be clear, whatever it is we're even talking about here, but getting into that pattern of expansiveness, healing, and not contracting, and, finding that path to courage and healing.
Well, what's even more amazing about that is you physically have a bigger anterior cingulate cortex than the average person. It actually grows and becomes bigger.
Wow.
That's why you were able to do that. So
That
you,
explains a lot.
doesn't it? But
Yes.
that's why you were able to do it. So
Yeah.
Martha should be your inspiration, right? She did it all naturally. That part of her brain was growing. When you go out of your way to avoid those things, it shrinks. So
Interesting.
you were growing yours, and physically, if they opened up your brain at one point and wanted to study your brain,
Sure.
right, they would find that part of your brain is bigger than the
Wow.
average person. And that's how you're able to do it. But if you, not just saying just you, I mean, anybody can do
Yeah.
it,
Right.
right?
It's just like
You
going
just
to the
happen to do it.
gym, right? And building a muscle.
Yep. And so you did it, and you're living proof that people can do it. And look at what you've accomplished.
Thanks,
Pretty
Don.
impressive. I mean, geez, look at what you, fighter pilot, U.S. Senator, U.S. Congresswoman. I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff, let alone the speaking that you do. And like your talk at Genius Network was the best I've ever heard. And I've said that to everybody. That was so powerful because you touched on so many things. And the thing that I loved that you touched on was identity. Right? When people get stuck in that identity, we talked a little bit about that today, but you
Yeah.
gave that message so powerfully. Don't get
Yeah.
stuck. I'm not a fighter pilot. I'm not this. I'm not that. That's what I did. Just like I said to
Yeah.
the woman, that's not who you are.
Yeah.
That's just what happened to you. Right.
And thank you, Don. It's very gracious. And this is where I am on my journey now, and my growth journey that I'm committed to. I wouldn't have given that speech a year ago because I didn't go through the things this year in my growth emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, to be in a place where I could be so open and vulnerable and aware of, wait a minute, I actually was attached to, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm in the military, I'm a colonel. Like, that's where a lot of my value came from. And in my own evolving and my own growth, which I'm committed to, I just was like, that's not who I am. It's not who I am. And it's also not what I've been through. I am not my past. I am not my feelings. I still have work to do. I am on a journey. I still have things that are probably suppressed that I am not even aware of. I'm sure I do. I'm a work in progress, just like everyone else. But in this stage of my journey, my calling is to be a vessel of inspiration and motivation, and to equip people through my keynote speeches, my online coaching, and my soon to be adventure retreats, so people can truly connect with who they really are, the divine essence of who they really are, shed these things that have been holding them back, and be able to take off and elevate their life in every aspect of it for the life that you truly desire and deserve to live.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see what you do next. It's just pretty impressive already. So I've loved this. This has been so good. I appreciate our friendship as well,
Yes.
and what
It's,
we've been able to share.
it's awesome. So how can people get in touch with you, Don? It's been a great conversation.
The Inspired Performance Institute is the best place to reach us.
Okay.
And you can learn a lot. There's a ton of testimonials on there, people who've gone through the program and how it's helped
Okay.
them. We're going to be publishing more studies like on how the DNA is affected and how we can actually modify it,
Awesome.
as well as the brain mapping, immune system stuff. It's pretty incredible. It's exciting.
Fantastic. All right. Well,
How
this is
about
a
you?
great
How do they
conversation.
reach you? How do they reach you?
So I'm at marthamcsally.com. People want to sign up for my emails, my doses of courage and things that I share. So please sign up for that. And I'm online at Martha McSally for, on all the different social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram is really what I focus on. And so, yeah, look forward to hearing from people. I just want to encourage everybody. My last message, and I'll give one to you, is you don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to stay in pain. You don't have to stay in your trauma. This is not your destiny. It may have been experiences that you've had in the past, but they do not define who you are, the divine essence of who you are, and they don't define the experiences that you can and will have in the present and the future. There is a path to healing and wholeness for you. Take charge, have the courage to take that journey of healing. It's available.
Great message. Awesome. What a great way to end.
All right. All right. All the best, Don. Thanks for this
All right, you
conversation.
too.
It was fantastic.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
People say to me, I sabotage myself. And what I say to them, it's impossible. Nobody can sabotage themselves. The brain is not capable of sabotage. It's a survival brain. It's trying to protect you. It may move you into a direction that looks like sabotage, but it's not sabotage. I'm going to be taking you through the process that I developed to help people perform at a higher level.